Hi everyone. I'm the director for a New Zealand NGO called Common Knowledge, and we house all of the birthing better skills that mums and dads and myself developed in the early 1970s. So today is lesson 5, and this is the COVID Quick Birth Skills online course. And what we're doing as an NGO is trying to share many of the skills with you in this format. And we also have a follow-up resource for you to purchase if you want. And just know that when you purchase it, it's really in some ways a choice donation because we are an NGO and we are tax exempt, and we've been around since 1996, and we need to continue to exist so we can spread the concept that it's normal and natural when you're pregnant that you learn birth and birth coaching skills, and you use those skills when you do the activity of birthing your baby, no matter where that birth occurs, no matter who's present, no matter the personal circumstances or your beliefs or your choices or your lack of choices or what happens to or around you. And why is that? Why did Birthing Better mothers and fathers are so insistent on that concept? Because each of us as a mother and father, we get pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth, and having our baby is important to us. And the activity we do to have our baby is always done better if we do it with skills, particularly if we do that activity together. Now, in this COVID era, we have reports from around the world that hospitals, particularly, are not permitting doulas and sometimes husbands or another person to be with a woman. Now, this is important for you to understand before I get on to the skills of today, which are on communication and touch. Every woman throughout time, throughout place, through, as long as humans have existed, every woman births alone. Even if she is in a room with millions of people, no one can do pregnancy for us, and no one can do the birth for us. We always are birthing alone. We are always birthing on our own, which means that each of us, me, when I got pregnant, you, if you are pregnant, you have to do the activity of birthing your baby. And this is where it comes down to a fundamental choice. Do you want to do that activity with skills, or do you just want it to happen to you? Do you honestly believe that the choices that you are making are going to do that activity moment by moment for you? Or do you feel that you should couple skills with the choices that you want? Do you believe, honestly believe, that if you had choices in one hand and skills in the other, and something changed and those choices were no longer available, that skills might carry you through being able to do that activity better? Just think about it. And how did we get to where we are? And that is what, after 50 years in the childbirth conversation, drives me nuts. Because when I gave birth in 1970 in the United States, and it's not that the United States is the best country in the world, it's just a country. And any country could have done what the US did, which was, for some quirk of a reason, the first childbirth classes were skills-based, Lamaze and Bradley. But Lamaze was taught everywhere, and there was a high societal expectation that all of us attend the first childbirth preparation classes. So all of us learned skills from the 60s to the 70s, which meant that when we went into hospital primarily, multiple millions of birthing women in the 60s and 70s had at least some level of skill, and the labor and delivery nurses and the obstetricians saw that. And the fathers who we demanded come with us were the first fathers to have skills to help us. So we had a birth coach, someone we knew, someone who's going to be in our child's life, to be with us and help us. But we still had to do the birth on our own. But now we had some skills, which meant that all of the assessments, monitoring, and procedures that were done for my generation the medical profession lightened up because they saw multiple millions of women. 8 out of 10 of us use skills. And then the natural birth movement of the next generation of the 70s and the 80s went, skills don't matter, because unfortunately Lamaze and Bradley in New Zealand, where we are, Grantley Dick Reed, Childbirth Without Fear, were saying that if you use skills, if you are having a normal pregnancy, if you're low risk, then those skills will help you have a natural birth, pain-free, with no medical care. And so the initial focus was wrong. The focus should have been 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth. 100% of pregnant women should have skills. And if that had been the message, we would not be talking today, because my generation would have said to their sons and daughters, it's normal and natural when you're pregnant to learn some skills and use your skills to do the activity of birthing your baby no matter what. And then that my daughter's generation, whose children, sons and daughters, were having babies now, would be 3 generations of being told it's normal and natural that when you're pregnant, you learn some skills and you use those skills to birth your baby. It doesn't matter. Now, I've talked in some of the other lessons about how we got where we are, that it is not the medical profession who has imposed what's happening on us. It was my generation and the following generations, because we started to lack skills, who started to demand from the medical profession that they make changes to prevent the risks that could happen. So please go back to the previous classes. I don't want to reiterate it now because I want to get on to the communication and touch skills. So it got broken back there because skills got dismissed. Cows and cats aren't taught to birth, so women don't need to be taught. They just need choices to say no to medical care. Well, choices go both ways. If you say women should have choices, they're going to choose more medical care when they lack skills. Now, I should have done a class on fear, and it may be that I'll start doing more of these classes to talk about and I did yesterday talk about why we need to develop a gift around fear rather than try to suppress it. And I don't want to talk about that now either, because I feel like I repeat myself, because I know this is a one-off that some people will see and some people won't. So we're going to go on to communication and touch. When birthing better mothers and fathers, when the people that I worked with, I'm not a midwife, I'm not a doula, I'm not a childbirth educator. I don't have to be anybody. I just happen to be involved in this. So when I started to work with families and they wanted to make changes because the skills of Lamaze and Bradley weren't broad enough, they weren't sustainable enough, they weren't adaptable, and they didn't cover enough areas. And you'd think, oh my God, it's just giving birth. Well, think about that verb, and I've talked about it another giving. What the hell's that mean? So we have to cope, we have to manage, we have to work through, we have to deal with, we have to handle. We want to try to stay on top of, and we're desperate to feel in control. And part of that is communication. Now, people go, communication, what does that mean? You're right. We need to refine what that means. First of all, let's talk about nonverbal communication. So if I'm talking to you now, I'm talking to you verbally. You're seeing my face. That's nonverbal communication. So let me ask you a question. How many of you find yourself, where you're listening to me, talking in your head? You're either agreeing with me, or you're disagreeing, or you're making arguments for or against what I'm saying. That's nonverbal communication in your head. I can't see it. I don't know what you're thinking. So you're having a verbal communication inside your head, which is, for me, a nonverbal, as a person outside of you, nonverbal communication. What I may see is what you sound like or what you're looking like. So if you're agreeing with me, you may be doing that. Or if you're disagreeing with me, you may be doing that. Or you may be doing that. Right? So I, as a person outside you, the birth coach, has to see that. So if you don't have a birth coach with you, nobody is going to necessarily see that. You have to understand what you're saying to yourself. So what mothers and fathers started to talk about, particularly women, was this conflict between the message that was coming out in the 70s and the 80s, which was women instinctively know how to birth, that birth is this highlight experience that women should absolutely love, and that we shouldn't have any fear around it, that women have always birthed, and that somehow these hormones, this oxytocin and endorphins, then just somehow stop us from having pain, and birth is just beautiful. This has all been destructive conversation from our viewpoint as advocates of having a skilled birthing population. It's sort of like why modern people so easily forget what it's like to have to find your own food, grow your own food, prepare your own food, make your own clothes, make your own house, make your own pots and pans and everything. When we became modern as human beings, we then lost our sense of reality. And that got coupled with modern medical care. When we developed antibiotics, when we developed immunizations, we became less frightened of things that people who have no access to those things know exist. So, as human beings, we have not changed our awarenesses, but we've been covered by the modern world. So, when we are told by natural birth advocates, birth is just this highlight experience, how do we as individual women cope with the fact that many of us do not like the experience of giving birth? Many of us feel anxious, many of us feel frightened, which is we're hardwired to be, and nobody developed skills, and I talked about in the last class. So go back to that. That's on our playlist in YouTube, or it's on our Facebook page. But what do we do when we find we don't like birth? Well, we're being told we should like it, that it's this highlight experience. But many of us don't like it. Many of us hate it. In fact, many of us, when we labored, felt like we were going to die. That's not positive thoughts. So when we are given skills and we have negative emotions, we often stop using the skills because we feel the skills are aligned to having this natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care that is supposed to enhance this highlight experience. But we can hate it. Many women hate it. And I worked primarily with very religious families. I'm not. And many of them had faith beliefs about how women should behave in their faith. I can't change that. So we, all of us, had to figure out skills around it. And what we did, and we have a resource called Negative and Positive Voice. So it turns out our human mind has two parts of it. One is it's the yak yak part, and the other it is the choice part. Let's call it that way. So for any of you who have worked or been in a car or had children, and you find yourself hating doing that, or not liking it, or feeling tense, feeling aggravated, feeling irritated, you know that your mind is thinking that way. And you know if you have skills, you do not act on that. Okay? When our kids are fighting in the house during lockdown, and we want to scream at them or smack them, most of us who have skills resist the temptation because we apply positive behavior skills. When we are in a car and we are frustrated or angry, we do not just bash the car next to us. We use skills even though we have those negative feelings. Same with work. Many of us do not like the work that we do. We cannot financially afford to just scream at everybody because we're not happy. Birth is the same thing. It's an activity. Yes, it's infrequent. Yes, it's a one-off. Yes, we can't replay it. It's an activity. We have to do that activity. And when we have skills and we have the negative mind, then we acknowledge the negative mind. We don't try to suppress it. We don't try to say, oh, this should be a highlight experience. Go down, negative thoughts. We just go, okay, negative thoughts. Okay, how am I going to behave when I feel negatively? What's my breathing going to sound like? How am I going to relax my body? How am I going to use good posture? How am I going to lie there inert on a table, numb down while they're operating on me and feel connected to my baby? How do I do that? I do that because it was normal and natural for me to self-learn skills when I was pregnant, and now I am applying those skills to the activity and throughout the activity of birthing my baby. And why am I doing that? Because this is my baby's birth. Because I got pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. And this is my baby's birth. And damn it, I am going to do this birth with dignity and pride. I'm going to cope well. I'm going to manage well. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to handle it. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to stay on top, and I'm going to feel in control. This is my right, and I took time to become skilled to have this ability to do it. And that's why. And that's why, after basically hiding out for years, I have come back and said, we're in this situation. Women have always birthed on their own. Just because they can't have a doula or they may not have their partner, we women have to have the skills to birth our baby. No matter how we feel, no matter the sensations we feel, no matter what they do to and around us. And if we have a choice, and this is going to piss off a lot of doulas, but I'm going to tell you why. The person who should be your birth coach should be the person who's going to be in that child's life. And why is that? Because that person is a human being who deserves to be skilled, just as you do, and to move through pregnancy, to work through this activity of helping their baby, a relative, friend, partner, be born, because they will be more confident as a parent or a relative or as a friend afterwards. I can't stress enough, and I've talked about this in other videos, and I'll try, I don't know how to, we can't put this all together in one thing, okay? It's fine to have a doula. You should teach them the skills, and they should be another person who's helping you. But really, we want doulas after birth because everybody wants somebody to help in the house, clean, cook, shop, do the laundry, help with the kids, give us 6 weeks of rest. That's really where we want help. The birth, the reason that doulas developed was because the natural birth movement of the 70s told fathers to stop coaching. They told them to support women's choices and to protect the sacred base of birth. Well, men are not, that's not their job. Their job is to work with the woman to help her cope and to manage. Fathers need to come back as coaches or somebody else, don't care. We use the word father because it's a catch-all phrase. They need to have the skills to cope and to coach us. And how can they? Because men and women all blink, we all cough, we can all tighten up our rectum, and at least with the Birthing Better skills, all the skills are based on what we share as human beings. Around the world, we're all one humanity. 100% of pregnant women will give birth one way or another. Every pregnant woman is doing the activity of giving birth alone. And if she has someone else in the room with her, she wants that person to help her. And she wants to share a set of skills so she understands what they're saying to her and they understand that they can help her effectively. So this is all about communication. If you've missed that, this is how we communicate. So for instance, if in the breathing, which we've talked about in the lesson in class 3 of this, okay, is that we discovered that there are 4 breathing patterns: in the nose, out the nose, in the nose, out the mouth, in the mouth, out the nose, and in and out the mouth. And that of those breathing patterns, some of them help us relax. And you can go back to lesson 3 of the COVID quick course on our YouTube channel, which is, I think, Birthing Better 1, and see that, or you can see it in the earlier Facebook pages. So When we know that we can relax by using in the nose, out the mouth, and certain variations, that there's also a variation in the nose, out the mouth that sounds like this. Oh. So that's a sort of a verbal, but it's also a nonverbal communication, because a woman's face will also imply she's not coping. So if her birth coach, her partner, her other, sees and hears that, then they can come in and model. So that's both verbal and nonverbal. They can see and hear and they can model it. So we're giving messages all the time. So it's very important that women know that if they have negative thoughts, they can use positive behaviors. Now, if we have nonverbal communication to our partner or other there, it often revolves around, don't do this to me. Okay? But we haven't developed skills about, please do this to me. So what a family needs to do is find out what are those nonverbal cues you use with each other. If you don't want somebody to do something, do you grimace? Do you shake your head? Do you put your hand up? Do you shrink back? What are the ways that you tell the people who know you non-verbally that you don't want to do that? Just talk about that. Show them. And then what do? Stop. Okay, that's fine. But now you have them in stop mode. So what happens if 0.00 second later you want them to help you? What do? So you have to show them what the yes is. So it can be, or like that, or put their hand someplace that you want them to, or sigh, or something. So a woman and the person who's going to be with her, she has to work with them to develop nonverbal coding. And that's really important, because often we hear, and this is going to go into the touch part of this. I have to put the cord on my computer. Hold on a minute. Sorry. Things that we don't think about before we do live broadcasts. So often this revolves around touch. It's very common to hear a woman say, I didn't want to be touched in labor. Well, that's not actually accurate. Women love to be touched. But this is the caveat. They want to be touched at the right time, in the right way, and in the right place. And this is what Birthing Better families discovered. Right time, right way, right place. And touch is a form of communication. And so when you hear women say, I didn't want to be touched in labor, what does the birth coach feel or say? So the birth coach who is seeing a woman, particularly when they're not coping, looking and sounding freaked, any human being wants to help if they're in the presence of a birthing woman. Every woman does, with the exception of the 1970s and 80s and present midwifery model from a famous author who said midwives should sit in a corner and knit, or another famous author who said women should be left alone to discover birth. Fine. Wrong. Women don't want to be left alone. If they are coping well, they don't want people fiddling with them, but if they're in a place where they need to have medical assessments, monitoring procedures, those are going to happen anyway. And they have skills, they'll use those skills to stay on top of and handle that situation. When women are coping well and they're in an environment with a birth coach doesn't normally impose on them because they can see the woman is coping well. That's nonverbal communication. However, if a woman doesn't cope well and somebody is in the room with her, and I talked about this yesterday in the earlier lesson, women want that person to help them, and they should want that person to help them. So often the first way we help one another as human beings is we reach out to touch. This is a human behavior. This is a good behavior. We touch. And if we're in labor and that touch is not at the right time and in the right way and in the right place, it distracts. We can't have distraction if we're focusing. So we push the hand away. Ah, don't touch me. And what does that birth coach do? Whoa, backs right off. They never come back again, or they come back as a pole that get hung on, or they just sit there. So now fathers are there, but they don't know how to help. So we had to develop touch, and we had to develop touch in a right way. But let's go back to the nonverbal communication. So let's say a woman and her husband, anybody, translate that one, doesn't like the touch. And she's developed a nonverbal cue. Okay, person takes the hand off. But she's developed a positive cue. So when she's ready to be touched again, she either nods her head or does something like come here, or just takes that hand and puts it in the right place where she wants to be touched. Okay. And that helps that other person know when to come back. And that is communication. And that's also teamwork in communication. That's working together with the person who's helping you. And so we developed teamwork skills. And there's a PDF about teamwork skills, just as there's a PDF about the positive and negative voice. And there's a PDF about communication, right? There's and the nonverbal and verbal communication. And there's a PDF and a video about touch. So let's talk about touch. Touch is the most exquisite way that humans relate to each other. We cannot stress how important touch is. We use it all the time. Mothers and fathers to their children, children to each other, mothers and fathers or men and women to each other, or people to each other, strangers, touch, 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 love, hate, touch, all sorts of ways that we use touch. And sometimes it's important for us to really like touch. And it's hard to explain to people what good touch feels like. And this is why we often, when we talk about childbirth as an activity, we get negative feedback from the natural birth movement that says birth is an instinctive thing. Women just need to trust it and be instinctive. Yes, it is. It's going to happen to us, whether we like it or not. It's the end of pregnancy. We're pregnant until the baby is born. So yes, it is instinctive. If we know nothing, do nothing, it's going to happen to us, and the baby's going to be born. Good or bad, whatever, it's going to be born. But humans want to refine things because we have a different part of our mind than most other animals do, and that's the cortex. That's the place that thrives on being skilled. So, are there other physiological things that equate to birth? Well, in some ways, not really, because birth is so infrequent and it's so dramatic. But let's just take hunger. Okay, it's a physiological thing. You know, we get hungry and then we get really, really hungry, right? You don't realize as you're listening to this that you choose foods because you've been taught what foods are safe or poisonous. So if we go around the world and you just get plunked into a country where you know nothing about the foods there, and there are a bunch of trees and bushes out there and they all look like they have beautiful things hanging from them that you could eat, you don't know which ones are safe for you to eat. We don't instinctively know that. And we can go even further than that. There are times when we know something's good to eat and we put it in our mouth and we say to ourselves, is that gone off or not? And if we're smart, we'll spit it out. If we're not too smart, we swallow it. And if it has gone off, then it can make us sick. If we're smart, we'll spew it out because then it won't have to go through our body to metabolize the toxins. But many of us don't. We just cope with not feeling well. So we have hunger. How about sex, which people have complicated feelings about talking about? So we can be randy and we can want to have sex. And we always tell the story of, okay, let's use that and just say, okay, uh, two people, randy, they come together and are told from today, 9 months from today, you can have one experience. And we're going to give you a sex education course, and they're going to have these wonderful slides. We're going to talk to you about sperm and eggs and erections and orgasms. But we're going to show you that you can't practice. We're not going to teach you any skills. We're going to just be information based, as we are with childbirth now. But you have choices. You can choose where you have that one experience. You can choose, what you want in that. You're going to make this sort of like a wedding. You're going to choose all the elements around it, because choice is so important to have you have this highlight one experience. And you've been given all the information that you need. So you're going to have this great experience, right? Is that right? No, that's not right. You know that unless you are skilled to be a good lover, the chances are a guy is going to ejaculate very quickly, and women are going to be left going, what was that? Okay. We need to learn to be good lovers, and that means we have to have skills. And when we are skills as a good lover, we use them every single conscious second of that intimate experience. We do it consciously. And that's what birth is. It's the conscious application of skills on a moment to moment basis. So, how do we use touch around this? And why are we using touch in birth? Because women need to focus on softening on the inside of our body. Because, as men said, and in the body skill lesson 2 of this, we said how the fathers developed all the body work skills. Because even though in the 70s we developed a lot of the skills to cope and manage and deal with the natural occurring pain of birth, the fact is we still had long labors. And as it became easier and safer to have more medical care, because the medical profession evolved in response to our demands as consumers, we then found ourselves having more medical care that led to safer cesareans and being able to be awake and different types of medical assessments, monitoring procedures. So what we found was we had to develop body skills. And what guys understood was it's an exercise in plumbing. It's a big object in a woman's container. It has to come down through and out her container. So guys get it. We can all tighten up our rectum. Tighten up your rectum now. Just tighten up down there. Is that going to hinder? So women would call it pelvic floor exercises or Kegel exercises. Tighten up down there. Hold back your pee. Do you really think that that is positive to prepare for birth? Women for years have been telling each other, do pelvic floor exercises during pregnancy to develop strong muscles so you can push your baby out. This is nonsense. It has been so destructive. Pelvic floor exercises should be done at any time before you get pregnant and up to 24 weeks and after birth for the rest of our lives. We need strong pelvic muscles on any side around pregnancy, but from 24 weeks onwards, we need to open up our body to let our baby out. We have to soften inside. So all of you who have tensed up now, soften. And now use your breathing. Inhale and expand in your pelvis. And exhale and soften on the ring inside your pelvis, your bony pelvis. And I'm going to talk you through that again. Soften inside your right hip. Soften inside your sacrum. Soften inside your left hip. Soften inside your lower belly or inside your pubic bone. We all do that, and the pause occurs because I'm doing that with you. I'm doing that in my body. And a man does that in his body as well. So what we found, and let me do that again, but do it without the conscious communication between two bodies. If I say soften in your right hip, soften in your sacrum, soften in your left hip, soften inside your pubic bone, you can't do it. You hear those words, but you haven't been able to couple your body to make that response. That's a communication. That's a nonverbal communication. So we had to develop all these levels of communication, verbal and nonverbal communication. Fathers found that it was tiring to verbally say to a woman, soften in your right hip, soften in your sacrum, soften in your left hip, soften in your lower belly or your pubic bone. That if we did that again and again and again and again, it was fatiguing. It was tiring to do. So, Birthing Better Families, practical people as we all were, we developed a way to use touch to cue a woman to do that. But it wasn't any old touch, because we go back to the premise that women love to be touched if it is in the right time, the right way, and the right place. So let's talk about touch. There are all different ways that we touch each other. But we had to be able to explain this to one another wherever we were and whoever we were. And sadly, I can't actually show this to you, and so you have to follow along and do this on the top of your leg, okay? So maybe if I change this computer, I'm going to bring this down so you're going to see the top of my leg, okay? Okay, so here's the top of my leg, all right? So what we found is that this is my clothing, okay? I'm touching my clothing. Underneath my clothing is skin. I can feel the skin, and you can. Under the skin is fat, okay? We have flesh, okay? And under the flesh is our muscles, right? And under the muscles are our bone, way down there. Now the bone, the muscles, the flesh, the skin is all held together with this connective tissue. And we'll talk about that. But let's just go through those layers. So when you touch somebody, and remember, it's the right time, the right place, and the right way, right? So if I say to you, can you tense up your skin without tensing up something else? All of us would say, no, I can't do that. You're right, you can't. Can you tense up your flesh without tensing up anything else? No, we can't do that. Can you tense up your muscle without tensing anything else? Sure, I can do that. You can feel that. Now let it go. Can you tense up your bone? Nope, can't do that. So let's just call this the muscle at the moment. So what I want you to do is put your hand down here, and I want you to just gently feel the skin, the flesh, the muscle, and I want you to press down deep into that muscle. Not hard, not jerky, just press down into that muscle. Okay? That person feels that pressure. Okay? And then just quickly raise your hand up. Okay? Then I want if you do it yourself, tense up that muscle. You can see that. Press down into that muscle. And then quickly come up and say, relax. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. So tense it up again. Come down to that muscle. And then slowly, slowly, slowly bring your hand up and slowly let go of the tension in that muscle. Slowly do it. Now you're going to have to practice this a few times. If there's tension in your muscle, now don't tense up, just go to another place, come down into an unintentionally tense muscle, but slowly, slowly come up as you soften under that touch, as that touch rises. So that touch softens. You can feel that. You can feel that. And another person can feel that as well. And when you can feel that, that is a form of touch communication that you can use in labor. Now, where do you do it? First of all, it's a life skill, so it can be done at any time. But in birth, it's particularly done well around the pelvis. And why is that? Because that's the only place the baby needs to come through. You can do it on the shoulders. Babies aren't coming through the shoulders. Sometimes you can do it on the forehead because that calms the stress in a woman's mind. But where she really needs the help is if you do it on the pelvis. Where do you do it on the pelvis? First of all, you have to become familiar with where. And that's where your partner can take your hand and put it on the pelvis, part of the pelvis she would like. Once you become familiar, and in the body skills in lesson 2, we talked about the hip lift, finding the hip blade on another person when they're lying on their side. And what did we say in that class? Have them take your hand and put it where the hip blade is, so you're not on their waist or you're not on the top of the leg. When you need to find the bone they sit on, have them take your hand or put their hand on their sit bone and you go put your hand where their hand is. This is communication. This is teamwork. This is what Birthing Better Families developed. This is why these skills are so impactful. So once you've learned this form of touch and you put your hand, remember we just went around that circle, soften in your right hip. I'm doing it as you're doing it. Soften in your sacrum. I'm doing it as you're doing it. Soften in your left hip. Soften in your pubic bone, your lower belly. So instead of being tired by saying that, I can just, as a birth coach, the father, just put his hand on the right hip. Put a little pressure down, as we just showed, and slowly reduce that pressure, and the woman will soften. And then you can put your hand on the sacrum, slight pressure on your hand, the sacrum, and slightly ease the pressure, and the woman will soften inside her sacrum. If you put your hand at the pubic bone, big belly there, pubic bone, and on the sacrum, that's the front to back dimension that your baby's moving through, and you put slight pressure, and then you slightly reduce that pressure and lift it slightly, the woman will soften front to back. The same way if you go side to side on the hips, slight pressure in, slightly easing that pressure. She's cued to soften. That's what's going, that's the verbal and nonverbal communication in her body. That's the verbal and nonverbal communication in your mind. But you're using nonverbal touch to make that happen. She knows, you know. You know, she knows, you know. What does that do to a couple or a family working together in birth? Women can do this for themselves if they're alone in birth. We can just put our hands on our hips, press in a little bit, and slowly ease that pressure and soften inside. We can do that front to back. We can even do that on the obliques. if we feel we need to soften on those obliques. So you need to understand that communication and touch are all mixed up together. And when we get them right, when we know what we're talking about, when we know we're communicating this well together, we just have this incredible highlight experience, which is intimate at that level of being good lovers to one another. And this is why it's so important. This is why birthing better families, why I felt so privileged to carry this forward for 50 years. Just imagine if these skills had been developed and just dissipated to the wind. And in some ways they have been, because the natural birth movement of the 70s and the 80s that dismissed these skills as well, those that heard about them. So for the many, many years that I carried these voices and carried these skills around the world, they were dismissed. Or they were taken by individual birth providers as what they should do on their clients, or what they should teach to their clients, along with the multiple other things that they taught or did. That was never, ever, ever going to work. We, human beings, need to be skilled to birth our baby, and we need to self-learn skills. And our birth professional roles, whether they're obstetricians or midwives or doulas or childbirth educators, should be to tell us, encourage us, inspire, and insist that from 24 weeks onward, we learn birth skills. And every skill we learn should just be plunked into our notes at each appointment. We learn breathing. Birth professionals don't need to know how we're doing our breathing. They may not even be at the birth with us. Even that adored midwife for that home birth who we're counting on might be sick that day, or her child might be sick, or there may be a snowstorm, or she may have a flat tire, right? We cannot rely on other people to get us through birth. We have to have skills to do this. So when I spent 25 years doing this, and then I immigrated to New Zealand in the 1990s, and New Zealand had a midwifery model of care, which was a perfect format in a partnership to have skilled direct entry midwives working with skilled women who self-learned skills. No, the midwifery model in New Zealand is based on that same model of the 70s and the 80s, which is pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care. Their role as midwives should be to respect women's choices. Women should just choose the birth they want. It's instinctive. Cows and cats aren't taught to birth. And so women, it's an insult to us as women that we're skilled. And so here we are now, all these years later, with this incredibly missed opportunity. And when COVID came out, I decided, no, 76 years old, I'm going to now begin to speak out more, because we need to grow a skilled birthing population that self-learns. Thankfully now, there are a number of skills-based methods besides Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed. Birthing Better, yes, we're very, very developed in this because moms and dads develop the skills. It's unlike any other childbirth method. There's hypnobirthing, hypnobaby, birthing within, calm birthing. These are all skills-based methods. What's been sad about it is that, with the exception of Birthing Better, all the other methods are still just focused on those low-risk women who are going to have this natural, ideal birth, rather than 100% of pregnant women will give birth. And perhaps by my speaking out at this point, maybe other skills-based methods for all births will happen. We hope so, because we have a global problem. The problem isn't that we have too many cesareans. The problem is we have too many cesareans that are caused by a lack of skilled birthing mothers and skilled birth coaching dads. And why do we know this? Because our 30 to 40 to 50% cesarean rate is due to women who don't cope well and long first and second stages. And that tells us something. It tells us that women haven't learned to prepare their body for birth. Why did we need forceps? Because the soft tissue of our vaginas was so tight that this big object trying to move through us had trouble. That this soft tissue was so tight that it delayed the ability of this big object to open us up. Now, the natural birth movement said, just let it stretch naturally, that it's okay for a baby to be in the birth canal for hours and hours. No, it isn't okay. The baby is trying to be born. It's moving out of its protected environment and needs to be born. Many, many years ago, I saw 2 home birth videos of babies who had died because they were a delay on the perineum. We don't need to have a delay on the perineum. We need to learn to do the internal work. And that's part of the Birthing Better. It takes 5 minutes a day from 32 weeks onward. Do you think you have enough time to do that? You should, right? But often we hear women say, I don't have time to learn skills. I'm busy. And our response as a not-for-profit is to say to women, when your baby's born, are you going to have time for your baby? And they say, of course we're going to have time for our baby. Your baby's here now. You're pregnant with your baby. You need to have time to learn skills to make it easier for your baby to come down through and out your body. We need, as a society, to have skills to cope better in birth so that we don't suffer. Because the medical profession is going to want to stop our suffering. That's what we want them to do. And if we don't want the things that they do, then we have to have the skills to cope better so that they can see that we're managing better, like they did in the 70s when they saw multiple millions of us coping better and not suffering. If we want to not have a delay in first and second stage, we have to understand what dads understood. It's an exercise in plumbing. Big object, got to come out of the container, got to figure out how to open up the container. This isn't rocket science. It's easy. We can do hip lifts. We can do sacral maneuvers. We can do cakes, cats. We didn't go over the sit bone spread. We can prepare the inside of our vagina. None of this takes a lot of time. But if we don't become skilled, then we're just left with birth happening to us. It no longer becomes that activity that we do. It becomes an event. It becomes something that we have no control over because there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And that's true. But we always have to do that activity. So if we become skilled at doing it, if we learn the skills to cope, if we have prepared our body to open up, if our body becomes pliable, flexible, mobile, if we can create space. And remember, we went over this. Okay, we went over this. Put your index finger and thumb together. Squeeze, create tension. That can't move. That's the stuck baby. That's the long labor. That's the long labor, stuck baby, or baby that hasn't come down through the pelvis, or the delay in the cervix dilating. So just soften, 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 soften. I haven't moved my index finger off my thumb, but now I can slide it easily. That's the difference. So what you learn today with the touch, you soften on the inside of the pelvis. You use verbal or nonverbal communication to do that. That changes the dynamics of what's inside our pelvis. And so our baby can move through. And our cervix is more likely to be able to retract back into our pelvis when we're soft in there. And we went over this in the breathing one, the pelvic clock, how to soften inside the pelvic clock with our breathing. so that as we breathe in, we expand in our pelvis. And as we breathe out, we mentally go around inside the bony pelvis and soften there. And we use this touch relaxation to do the same thing. And what does that do? That softens the tissue so that when we have a contraction and it pulls on that muscle, that's 50% muscle cells and 50% connective tissue cells, it opens up the cervix. And once that cervix is open and we have a mobile bony pelvis, then our baby can move down. And if we've prepared all of the deep soft tissue in our vagina, then that tissue opens up and our baby moves through. And then we are more likely to have a vaginal birth, which is how women always birthed. We're more likely to cope with the natural occurring pain of contractions, which is what we want. Women didn't want to suffer in childbirth, and they did because we never thought about really having skills for birth. We had skills around what you wear, how you eat, what you do during pregnancy, and we have it after birth, what we do with our baby. But Birthing Better, only the families that developed it only focused on preparing our body for birth and how we use these skills to birth our baby. For all births, if we had a cesarean, we loved preparing our body because our body was preparing to labor and have a vaginal birth. And for some reason, we weren't going to have that activity to birth our babies. So we loved preparing our body. It brought intimacy. It brought confidence. We learned the skills. So when did we use them? Well, if we were going to have a cesarean, we still often had Braxton Hicks contractions. So we practiced our breathing, relaxation, softening during that. And then we intentionally used those skills on the way to the hospital. When we were with that person who was going to be with us, often we found ourselves separated while we were being prepped. But we had skills and they had skills. We knew that they were going to be in another room doing their breathing relaxation while we were doing our breathing and relaxation. And they knew that of us. And then when we come together for the surgery, we could use touch to soften. We could use the breathing and relaxation together because we're working through this activity of birthing our baby. Nobody around us needs to know. But it stops us from being passive. It stops us from being overwhelmed. It stops us from having anxieties. So, what do we want from all of you? Gosh, we want you to spread this new childbirth trend. And we'll re-articulate it. It's a concept. So it's an idea. The idea is that all of us should be skilled to birth our baby. So we have to find words that I can give you, that you can give others. It should just be normal and natural when you're pregnant that you self-learn birth and birth coaching skills and you use those skills to birth your baby. In all births. If we have to put a goal to this, the goal is that women cope better, deal with, handle, work through, stay on top of, and feel in control, manage better. If we have a goal for our birth coach, is to help us to cope and manage better. Those are active verbs. We do not have a goal to have more natural births because nobody understands what the word natural is. So if we start in the premise, we're by ourselves birthing, that birth can be horrible and it can have a terrible outcome. Doesn't mean that I or a baby could die. It could be terrible outcomes anyway, because there are a lot of bad outcomes around birth, challenging. So we are not about natural birth. We are about all births, and we are about having the dignity to do the activity of birthing our baby with a good set of shared skills that all of us can use. So I've come to the end of my hour now. Our websites are on this, birthingbetter.org. You can find our courses along with the COVID-19 course. We have a VBAC course as well. And we are a charitable organization. You can go to commonknowledgetrust.org and give us a donation if you want. Help us keep spreading this message. For God's sakes, this message should have been happening this whole time. It hasn't. Now we need to have a new childbirth trend. Skills, 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 along with the choices. See you later. And tomorrow, what are we talking about? Progression of labor. See you later. Bye-bye.